Soundbars. They're everywhere and all the rage when you walk into an electronics shop, want to buy a TV? Free or discounted soundbar. Bam. Games console? Get $100 off a soundbar. They're pretty much everywhere and in so many people's living rooms, but honestly, they sound kinda awful. Today I want to make a case for the traditional bookshelf speaker and why I think that a good set of bookshelf speakers is going to be pretty much any soundbar, asterisk, I'll talk about that a bit later, and actually show off some of Edifier's products that I have today. Hey guys, I'm Ryan Thomas and I want to present a couple of prerequisites before we go into the video because I'm not talking about every soundbar that's ever made. I'm also not talking about every set of bookshelf speakers that's ever made. So let's talk about that. Firstly, you can buy crazy soundbars from Sonos, Samsung and all that, and you can pay 4 figures for them. That's really cool. I've only really experienced soundbars up to around the $500 mark. So I'm going to be talking with experience from the sort of $100 to $500 mark, the same bracket that I would also include bookshelf speakers in. I haven't been lucky enough to check out LS50 Metas or anything like that. Also, whilst Edifier did send out their S1000W bookshelf speakers, this isn't a review or anything. They're also not paying me to do this video. They sent out their speakers because I wanted to produce this sort of feature piece. They were happy to do that. So check out their links in the description, but I'm not generating any kind of income from this. They're not paying me. So yeah. Okay, soundbars, eh? Well, they're not all bad, and I hate to say that, but they do have their uses. Usually they're very thin, they're very low profile, and this means that you can sit one below a TV, whether it's on a stand or on a bracket, and generally not have to create any kind of width on top of your TV. They also usually come with a subwoofer, which generally is responsible for the sub bass and mid bass, but also with soundbars in particular is sort of lent on for a lot of the bass to high bass to sort of lower mids, which we'll talk about a bit later. But generally they're not the worst thing in the world. You would generally buy one if you didn't have a lot of space or you didn't necessarily have the feasibility to add any kind of width to your TV setup with a set of bookshelf speakers. They also tend to have smart features such as Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, sort of streaming from Spotify, Tidal Connect, all that kind of thing, on top of the ability to connect via optical or HDMI ARC. I don't generally have a problem with the functionality of the soundbar, more the sound of the soundbar. And I'm talking about the soundbar in particular here. A subwoofer is nice to have. If it's well done, then I appreciate it. But a lot of the soundbars that I've listened to, every single soundbar I've listened to, bearing in mind that I haven't listened to anything past around $500, is so reliant on the subwoofer for any kind of mid-range or lower mid-range, it creates an almost U-shaped curve that's a very sort of I would like to say there's a crater in there where you would expect the sort of mid bass and sort of the throatiness to a good rock song to really be. So you would have nice bass in there, maybe even the ability to rumble the room, shake the sofa, whatever. You have these really crisp, detailed treble and upper mid-range bits that, you know, they're able to deliver really good clarity in speech or anything like that because they're generally made for movie watching as opposed to music listening. But then you have this, what sounds like an absolute crater of frequencies missing. This is no real mistake of the soundbars because the soundbars are so low profile usually, it means that they have to have really small drivers in them. Now generally, as you go smaller in the driver, it's not able to reproduce the same kind of bass or mid bass. So you have a big subwoofer, maybe, you know, on a soundbar side, sort of a 6.5 inch subwoofer, not huge, but bigger than the soundbar drivers. And then you would sort of have, you know, 1 to 2 inch drivers in the soundbar, which are able to deliver great clarity, but just nothing in between. By comparison, a good set of bookshelf speakers will have sort of 4 to 6 inch cones in them. Now that's able to deliver a lot of mid-range and a lot of bass, but also the ability to, you know, usually has a tweeter in there that's able to fill in the rest. Now usually these bookshelf speakers aren't going to go down as low as a subwoofer does, but with bookshelf setups you can include a sub if you have the right amplification, and you can fit one in at this price range if you're willing to forego fancy features in your amplifier, for example. In my experience, most bookshelf speakers deliver that sort of consistency, not necessarily flatness, but good amount of sound and volume throughout the frequency response range, to the point where you feel like you have a fuller sound. Now, a fuller sound might mean different things for different people. Sound is incredibly subjective, but my idea of a full sound is sort of that grunt that you get in a rock song that isn't really bass, and it's not really the mids, but it's sort of the lower mids, the high bass, and it's something that usually is missing from a lot of soundbars that bookshelf speakers do so well. And it's something that I distinctly listen out for when I'm listening to music, because it's almost, it feels like it's the foundation of the song. The mid bass and the sub bass don't tend to be the sort of foundation. You hear it, that it's there, it's subtle. In films, it's going to be much more than that, but in music listening, you want something that has a nice sort of lower bass to mid bass to high bass foundation to give you that smooth transition, which creates almost a natural feeling. It's one of those things where if you don't have it, you notice it, but if it is there, then you don't really notice it because it just sounds normal. Thing with TVs is that they try to make these TVs as thin as possible, so what they end up doing is making the drivers really small, which leads to a tinny sound. Thankfully, there are TVs out there that have decent speakers built into them, but actually you are generally going to get a better sound with a soundbar. I just don't think it's worth the money. Take the S1000W Edifier speakers, for example. They're around $400 to $500 depending on where you get them. They are a really clean, good looking set. They don't have any dials on the front, just the LED and sort of the sensor on the front of the right speaker. You get a load of dials on the back, you get smart functionality, you can do Spotify connects. I've connected my set over optical, you can also use a coaxial, and you're able to connect over Bluetooth if you want to do just a straight Bluetooth streaming. Yet they look like traditional bookshelf speakers. They don't look any sort of fancy, smart, high-tech stuff, which I like because I prefer sort of traditional looking stuff. And yeah, I mean, they're quite big, they're quite heavy, as you would expect from something that big, but they have nice big drivers, give you really deep rumble in the bass. It's not really the same as a subwoofer, but I do like the fact that they're able to give you a good deep bass experience. You could use them with a subwoofer using the right sort of interconnects and amplification. These don't have a subwoofer out built in, which is a shame, but it's something you could mitigate if you knew, what you were doing. And yeah, lots of clarity, lots of bass, that nice mid-range that I'm talking about that you would so horribly miss on a soundbar, yet is really nice and present here. And I'm not being paid to say nice things about them. If I was gonna nitpick a bit, I would say that maybe they're a bit on the big side, although they probably have to be. And I would also say that they maybe don't go as low as I want them to. But overall, I'd say they're so good for listening to music, watching movies. You can get the same kind of thing with a pair of passive bookshelf speakers connected to an amp that you might have, say from Amazon. You can get them for sort of £40 to £50, or an AVR that has a load of HDMI inputs and the ability to expand. So you start with something small, maybe you have a 2-speaker setup, but then you want to add in a sub, maybe a center channel for a bit more audio clarity in vocals and stuff, and then include some surrounds, so you've got a 5.1 system. There's so much you can do with a set of bookshelves. Even if they're not powered, you're able to create almost a building block to create an experience that you're just never going to be able to get with a soundbar. Want to add some speakers to a soundbar? Unless you're buying some bespoke stuff, not very easy to do. But with an AVR, by all means, chuck some surrounds in there, and if you have the right one, you could add Atmos and all sorts with top speakers and everything. Of course, we're talking way more money at this point, but if you're standard 2.0 or 2.1 setup, I really do think the bookshelf speakers are the way to go. Yeah, that was my video today, guys. I know it's not a particularly in-depth one, but just one I really wanted to talk about. You probably sound quite passionate about this kind of thing. I just recently bought a soundbar and it sounded absolutely awful. Immediately returned it, and obviously tried some bookshelves and they're just so much better. It's ridiculous. Links to Edifier and my other stuff, Linsoul and Patreons and everything, will be in the video description. Like, comment, subscribe if you're new around here and never miss a video like this one. Yeah, thanks to my patrons for being continually supportive. I've been Ryan Thomas, and I'll catch you later. Cheers.